Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Mastering Inspection Readiness for FDA's AI tool, Elsa. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and your comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn Live event, and I encourage you to submit your questions as well via the comments tab. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming to those who have registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Advarra, who developed the content for this presentation. Advarra is #1 in trusted research review services, #1 in site operations technology, and the pioneer in study collaboration solutions. Their unique portfolio of technology and services reduces friction by decreasing technology burden, improving study visibility, and enabling smarter decisions that advance clinical research. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Abe Seckler is the Managing Director of GXP Services at Advarra with over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and life sciences industries. Abe is an accomplished senior leader specializing in global quality strategy, business operations, and R&D at both startups and the largest pharmaceutical companies. This has included developing novel products, establishing global quality governance, and ensuring compliance with external and internal requirements. And Dennis Rodman serves as a Senior Director of Quality Management Systems and Digital Compliance at Intellia Therapeutics, bringing deep expertise in quality systems and regulatory compliance to the biotechnology sector. With a strong foundation in operations and efficiency, he champions integrating artificial intelligence and automation to transform compliance processes and drive operational excellence. Now, before we hand it over to our first speaker, we'd like to first get a little bit of audience interaction, and we have a poll question on screen that you can participate by selecting on any of the answers you see in front of you and then clicking submit. Now, only those watching via GoToWebinar can do this, but if you're watching on LinkedIn Live events, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well into the comments section. Now, the question we have for you is, how do you feel about AI's growing role in the research industry as a whole? Your answer options are: excited, I see huge opportunities ahead; curious, I'm eager to learn how it will impact my work; cautiously optimistic, big potential, need more clarity; neutral, you're still forming your opinion; or you're thoughtful, I see challenges but believe we can manage them. Again, we'd like to hear from you right now to the question of, how do you feel about AI's growing role in the research industry as a whole? We'll give everyone a few more seconds to consider an answer, and then I'll hand it over to our speakers then to get things started. All right, it looks like most of you have your answers in, so thank you very much for participating. Let's take a look at the results we have for this poll. We have 34% of you choosing excited, 26% for curious, 29% choosing cautiously optimistic, 6% then for both neutral and thoughtful. Again, thank you very much then for your participation. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our first speaker, Abe Seckler. Abe, you may begin when you're ready.
Thanks very much, Ryan. It was interesting seeing everybody's response to the poll there. I don't think it was particularly surprising, right? It's when we talk about AI, it's a pretty broad level of experiences people are expecting to have. A lot of people are excited, but a lot of people are really trying to keep up with how fast things are moving, and that's kind of what the theme is for today. Again, I just want to make sure I thank Dennis here for joining me as my co-presenter. This has been a real pleasure to put together, and I appreciate him taking the time to kind of walk through this with us, and him taking the time to do this. Just as we talk about the results to the poll here, What's we were joking about it before as we are working through what the impact of the industry has looked like and what that means. To me, it really feels like a lot like what had occurred with the Industrial Revolution at the turn of the last century. Right? You don't want to still be the farmer out in the field trying to push the plow with your horse while your neighbor is pulling things along with a diesel tractor. But what we always forget is that we see the success, we see there's some survivorship bias, right? We see what worked out well. What we always forget is during that period of time too, there were a lot of very stupid inventions that never really made it. And it is important for us to keep that in mind too, that AI, like anything, is a tool, and there is opportunities for rapid advancement. And so I'll say, as we kind of dive into it here, Dennis, as you kind of look at what is happening and why we're talking about AI today, what is your feelings on that? And like looking at those responses to the polls, does that resonate with you too?
Thanks, Abe, and thanks, Advarra, for the opportunity to present today. Appreciate the audience joining. I know we're close to the holidays, and a lot of people have packed it up for the year, but I think this is a great topic. Yeah, it resonates greatly, especially in the work I'm doing. I think there's blind enthusiasm with AI, which can be dangerous, where you go forward and you say, let's implement everywhere. Again, I don't know if that's the answer, but I think being cautiously optimistic and having smart implementations is where the industry needs to go. I think what you said about the Industrial Revolution is very on point. I think one of the things today, I think people hear AI and they panic and they say, oh, robots are going to take over. What are we going to do? I'm going to be obsoleted from my job. And I don't think that's what AI is doing right now. An analogy I like to draw is if you have children who play sports or you watch sports on TV, I think it's amazing in the last 30 years what technology has done between nutrition, film study, how they train all year round. My son came home and was asking for things for football and track, and I looked at him and said, 30 years ago, I didn't use any of those things. And I guess the term today they use is unk, which means you're an old man and you're not relevant anymore. So I think what AI is really doing for people is it's keeping you competitive. So where in the past, athletes were slower or not as fast or not as strong, I think today what you're seeing is AI is enabling everyone to be faster, stronger, smarter. And I think that's how the FDA plans to use it. And I think as an industry, we need to take that and be more competitive. And the way to do it is look for new solutions, look for AI solutions, and implement those.
I think that's a fabulous example, and I too feel when I was coaching my my youngest daughter's soccer team this year, I also felt the age pressing down on me pretty severely. You touched on what the FDA is doing, the way it's planning on potentially using AI. I think what's very interesting here is earlier this year was the first time I heard about Elsa was over the summer, like many of us. There is there was a lot of not just trepidation but curiosity about exactly what it was and how it was going to be used. What I found fascinating was I sat down with a number of the folks internal here at Advarra, as well as lots of folks like yourself and outside the organization, to say, what does adoption really look like? What is the utilization of this AI tool really means? And I'll be totally honest, I was I was not expecting things to move nearly as fast as they have. And even if you compare where we are, 6 months ago, the conversation I was having with our clients and people was just that, Elsa is something that we need to keep on the radar. We anticipate it potentially being rolled out and used later, potentially the year, to help offset some of these international audits and places to help control costs and with maybe some smaller companies. And that is obviously not the intent of of today's FDA at all. In fact, if many of you may or may not be aware, there was just 2 weeks ago from today, on December 1st, there was a release that really outlined a lot of the intent to use AI for more and more FDA operations. That includes things like the pre-market reviews, the post-market surveillance, and what I found most interesting, and obviously affects my piece of the world so much, is in inspections and compliance. And really, it was that this was outlined for the whole world, and then they said, well, and then in January, more information will come after they have their internal group gets together. And I think a lot of us are sitting and waiting. I was like, well, what does that mean? And and that part of the reason why we had put this together, even before this announcement on December 1st, we had planned this discussion of how do you get inspection ready for this type of in today's world.
Yeah, but I think it's a good point, and I think when I first thought, oh wait, I need to take this a lot more seriously, was when all of that government layoff, Doge, cut spending, right? Because you think about that, and I said, well, they're going to implement technology to try to speed up things, cut government spending, and I think FDA has followed with that larger government initiative. So yes, they're moving fast, and I think they're moving fast because it's just a mission statement right now. Some colleagues I work with said, wow, they really are pushing this out fast, and that is unusual. Typically, health authorities will lag a little bit behind industry. I think they're in front right
now. Yeah, I totally agree. So, to try to navigate this, right, one of the things you and I had talked about is, well, what other comparisons in and outside of the industry are there that we can look at where, technology causes this kind of shift that AI is potentially driving? And, it is, right, we're used to this more traditional approach, a little bit slower, but with things moving faster, it's hard to necessarily make like-for-like comparisons, but I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't look at this. And one of the examples you had brought up was e-tax filing, which I loved. Can you imagine filing your taxes now by paper? I mean, can you remember the last time you did that, Dennis?
If I filed my taxes by paper today, like just filing the forms, I'd probably be in jail. So, I use TurboTax, and right, what does TurboTax do? It goes through, it says, hey, you sure about that number, right? It kind of does a check after you're done. How likely are you to be audited? It looks for missing entries, right? So what is that really doing? In a way, it is an AI algorithm that TurboTax has, helping you file your taxes, and then you hit e-file, it goes in, and then the government on their side has an algorithm where it's verifying those same numbers. I think when you think of it in those terms, and now you think of it in an inspection, you could say, wait, they do that a little bit right now with adverse events, where adverse events is more of a continuous stream to the agency, but now they're going to put algorithms over that and look for trends and look for analysis, and you may get to a time where critical deviations may be something you have to report real time, and they're looking for trends and they're looking for analysis. But again, I don't think that's different than other things going on today. I think what it is again, bigger, faster, stronger, and I think that's what you're seeing on the health authority FDA side.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, Dennis. And in fact, I know we were going to save the questions for the end, but a very, very pertinent question came in off of already from the audience, which I'm going to read out because I think it dovetails nicely into where we're kind of going with this conversation. So the question is, while Elsa can be a novel approach to review IND and NIDA applications, the concerns that I have is that it has not been properly trained and objectively validated to be used as a robust tool in assessing drug safety and efficacy. And they wanted our thoughts on that. The first thing that really jumps to my mind is this really mirrors what looked like in early Part 11 compliance adoption, right? There's a lot of confusion across the industry, and what that really resulted in was millions of dollars being spent on validations that were completely unnecessary. And I could see the exact same kind of thing happening now, where people get so overwhelmed that they just throw enormous amounts of time and resources that, frankly, there are even less now than there were during the adoption of Part 11, that things are already tight, and this could make things tighter. I don't know if you're feeling the same pinch over on your side of the world there.
No, and I think that's a great question, because I think even on the FDA side, you're going to have inspectors who don't trust it also. And then you'll have other inspectors that say, hey, let me implement this. It makes my job a lot easier. It makes me stronger, faster, right? Back to that analogy. Now, where's the mindset for a company? I think what I'm looking at is, again, I need to stay competitive to play defense against that too. So if they come forward with some sort of trend or some sort of analysis that I don't agree with, I want to have the tools to compete with them, to tell them, no, your tool is incorrect. And I think with that goes, if I go to a fight with a butter knife and you come with a machine gun, I'm never going to beat you, right? So I think that's where I am with this, to say, okay, if they're using it, I need something on my side, whether I believe in it, don't believe in it, think their side is hallucinating. I have to prove that to them. So I just don't wave the white flag when they come forward, because they're just bringing that level of intensity and I can't match it. So I think that's something from a competitive standpoint, and I like that question. I think the point is, they may not be always right. So you may have to prove to them, no, you're looking at this in the wrong way, and this is why we believe that, and then present it, and now you've neutralized the field.
No, that's exactly what we've had to manage from a lot of the questions that are already coming from our clients is, how do we prepare, right? I mean, you could make the argument in today's world, with the announcement 2 weeks ago in the use of Elsa, that every company that it says that they're inspection ready for the FDA is no longer inspection ready, because they are going to be dealing with somebody who is not a classically trained inspector. All the people that we work with here at Advarra, and all the teams that have been developed at companies are, nobody has the tools, or is still in the process of putting the tools together to be ready for this. So that kind of goes back to where we go from this optional, expected, mandatory timeline of things, and where, to your point, you're going to get a high level of variability depending on the type of inspector or reviewer that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think, Abe, I'll be careful that my wife is hiding when I say this, because she'll get mad, but I think she's upstairs. The concept of inspection readiness versus inspection living, I think, is really important. So I'm sure everyone has gone through this, especially around the holidays. People are coming over, clean the house, right? So what do? You shove things in closets, you put things in drawers, and you hide the mess. You have people over, you present, it's great, they go home, right? And now you're like, oh, okay, good, they went home. Now the house is messy again. I think that's kind of how we look at maybe inspection readiness sometimes. It's okay, an inspection is coming, we better get ready, we better clean our house. Where inspection living is, the house is always clean. What can AI do? AI is going to look in that closet that you jammed all the stuff in. AI is going to look in the drawer that you hid all the things in, and it's going to find it. So I think sometimes we play in the industry, let's hope they don't see it. Let's prep for it. Let's clean our data today. Let's clean up our records today. They're going to have historical references on you. They're going to look at 43s. They're going to have a whole profile on you. And I think you have to get into this more inspection living. And again, that's an enormous mindset change for some companies who just clean the house when people are coming over.
Yeah. Well, we have a huge basement that we do exactly that, Dennis. So
yeah.
You're not the only one. No, I completely agree. And honestly, you remind me of when I was first really starting to work in the industry. I was working at a CRO, and this CRO just happened to be down the street from one of the FDA's training facilities. So we would get inspectors that would come in all the time, so that they were, it was a great learning experience for them, and we were inspected constantly. But these inspectors that would come in sometimes were working with the USDA 6 months earlier and inspecting strawberries out in the field. Now all of a sudden they're on site looking at my extraction laboratory, trying to understand what the heck was even going on. And I can see a similar situation of where the results or the outputs of something like Elsa, that even the inspectors are struggling to understand what to do with it. And so you don't just have to be inspection ready, as you said, but inspection living, so that you are in a place to respond appropriately to an inspector who may not be comfortable with the output of this new tool.
And I think, things we all do, right? Inspections coming, oh no, close all those long read CAPAs, right? And I think now, what could it tell Elsa to do? It could tell Elsa, hey, look at all CAPAs that were long lead that they closed in the last 2 months, because we're going to circle that as a heat map. Why were they open? Why did they extend? Why did they do those things? And it's going to pinpoint and laser them into things that you may not want them to see, right? CAPAs that closed 3 weeks early, normally you did a pretty good job with those because you closed them 3 weeks early. Those CAPAs that extend 2 or 3 times, those CAPAs that, it's been open 9 months, it's been open 12 months, it's been open 18 months, Elsa gives them an opportunity to query that and say, hey, we want to go over your quality management system. And now they're going to pinpoint that, and they're going to ask you questions on those CAPAs. That's the thing you wanted to hide in the closet. And I think that, to me, is that whole inspection living concept. If there is an issue in your quality management system or with CAPAs or whatnot, make sure that you're really documenting that. Make sure everyone really understands what the limitations are there, because that's probably going to be the first thing they look at now.
So that's really great advice, and I don't know if we necessarily touched on it yet, but the big difference here is, right, when an auditor or an inspector comes to your site, they're looking at just a fraction of the document. So they look at the biggest offenders, they know where, they have the things they're comfortable looking at. But when an AI like Elsa is cut loose on your entire QMS, it's looking at 100% of the documentation. That is unprecedented.
Yeah, and I think, again, the best way I tell people to, so now the obvious question is, okay, that's great advice. Well, what do we do? I think the idea behind self-scouting yourself is really important, because what I just said, you could do that internally before they ever get there. So do you have solutions? Are you continuously monitoring? Are you, right? I mean, this idea of the quarterly management review that you present like a newspaper and print it out and then go into a meeting and everyone looks and claps and pats each other on the back, there's a lead lag behind that also. So
yeah, it's usually sometimes a month, if not a quarter behind, and
right.
you have to make sure there's time to make the slides look pretty. So
right. So I think, there's the capabilities today to have live dashboards and live monitoring and looking at this in real time. Senior leaders should be looking at it in real time, not waiting. I mean, how many of us wait for the newspaper to get thrown on the stoop today before we know what the news is? You don't, I mean, my father still does that. That's why I know everything 3 days before he does. And I think that's that same mentality and mindset of what companies have to believe. We want to know the minute it happens, the second it happens, not wait for the newspaper to be delivered 3 days later.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the expectation of having data and dashboards and things that are truly current and up to date is becomes even that much more important. Can you in the slide that we have up here too, I want to touch on how do you see things changing, from our traditional model, front room, back room, the way the inspection works, changing as this new model emerges, utilizing these tools with something like Elsa?
It's a great question, and what I tell people is I don't know, right? And I think that's why you have to be paying attention, engaged, and one analogy I like to use is the process improvement versus innovation versus transformation. I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but I remember when I talked to people on a phone attached to a wall with a cord, right? And I was excited when my father came home with a 30-foot cord, because now I could walk around the house and talk to people.
Yeah, but you couldn't tangle it up. If you walked around too much, it would get all tangled. You'd make a real mess.
Tangled and look, my father called that process improvement, right? And in a way it was. Now I could walk around the house. So what was innovation to that? Innovation to that was the cordless phone. Now, no cord on the wall. Okay, innovation. Now you can walk around anywhere you want. Maybe you could get to the mailbox, and then once you got past that, you were out of luck. But what was transformation to that was the cell phone. And the cell phone is really a fancy computer that makes calls. I think we're looking at the same thing. So where I challenge people on this is, don't look at your current maybe inspection checklist and say, hey, you know what, I'll put AI over my inspection checklist and I'll create some automation over it. Yes, that's great. That's process improvement. But what we may be looking at right now is something that's transformative, right? Where, and again, back to this, we don't play inspection readiness anymore. We play inspection living. And what does inspection living look like to your company? It may not look like anything that you currently have in place to support an inspection. It may be totally different. It may be continuous monitoring. It may be dashboards. It's probably going to be a really robust data governance and data hygiene program that a lot of people struggle with data. Data integrity, Alcoa was huge. Everyone follows Alcoa. You could have bad data that's has integrity, right?
Yeah. It's so, very accurate, but
right, but it's wrong. I think data, data accuracy and quality is going to be enormous to AI tools, because it's going to look at your data quality. Garbage in is garbage out. It's going to confuse it. So I think those are all things we should be looking at as an industry, how to get better at those things. A lot of people don't look at that today.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And we're getting some good questions coming in. I'm actually going to jump to another one just because it's so relevant to the conversation we're having right now. Somebody's asking, has FDA provided a detailed explanation of exactly what Elsa is effective at reviewing? Is there a dialogue with the industry on what it means to be Elsa ready? And most of the information that I have is like whispered information from people who have been inspected by Elsa already, and these are clients of ours. And the short answer is no. And we're hoping to get more information out of what being Elsa ready means from the FDA in January when they meet. But the reality is that we don't know what kind of information they're going to have for us, and it's seeming more and more that this is an opportunity for the industry and for our partners to kind of take the lead on what that means. And it kind of, I think the thing a lot of people forget too is that the FDA's inspectorate, first of all, had minimal involvement in drafting any of the AI guidance. What that means is that expectations for these things are going to develop very unevenly. This really came out of conversation I had with our FDA expert here, Dr. Jane Hewitt, who was formerly had worked at the FDA, and I had gone to her. I said, with many of these same exact questions, what does that look like? And the one thing that we've really been able to suss out is, judging on what we've seen in the past and judging on what we're seeing right now, is that we can expect kind of an uneven expectations to be coming out. That the FDA centers, they have disparate legacy systems, so even the integration of Elsa internally to the FDA, it's going to take time. They're going to have their own challenges that they face, so it's going to be really difficult for them to tell us what we need to do to be Elsa ready. What it's effective at reviewing, the thing I have heard, and don't hold me to this, but the thing I have heard is that Elsa is about 85% AI accurate, which is around the industry standard for these types of tools. And but what that means is it's not fallible, and that what it's good at and what it's not good at is still very unclear. So I wish I could give people more firm answers to that. But I think that goes back to what you're saying, Dennis, is that this is an opportunity for everybody to be proactive, and take what we have to do is take the information that we're getting now and utilize it to our best of ability. And that's what we're helping our clients with. I'm sure you're doing similar.
Yeah, I think depending on the way you look at it, and I think we're in an industry that looks at guidelines and regulatory expectations and then follows them. I don't think this is that cut and dry right now. I think we're all learning together. So I think when you learn together, what's really important, be curious. So I would say to everyone sitting in here, if you're sitting in here, that's being curious. That's a good first step. If it's a year from now and you don't even know what Elsa is, you're probably going to be in trouble as a company. So I think the fact that you're in this, you're asking the questions is a good first step to being curious. You know, when you ask what is it good at, the one thing I would say to everyone here is think about what ChatGPT is good at. Think about what Gemini is good at. It's good at finding trends. It's good at looking at large sets of data and potentially breaking those down for you. It's good at analytics. That's what it's going to be good at first. Now, there's some things it's not good at, but it is good at taking a lot of data and interpreting that data really fast. So if you're a big company and you have a large set of CAPAs and a large set of data and you throw all those at the agency, they're now where it may have taken them a week to look through all that, they may pick up a trend in 5 minutes off that data. And that's where you really have to be locked in. You have to know trends in your data because they're going to find the trends in your data. And if you have a hole in your data or you have a trend in your data that is a weakness in your quality management system or process, you'll know this from ChatGPT and Gemini. They're going to find it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And you know, and I've even been asked, you know, can tools like this, you know, find like a whole missing documents, things like that. And what you can really tell is something, you know, an AI tool is very capable at finding what's missing when compared to something else, right? So think of your, you know, the way your SOPs are written, the way your own internal documents are written, and compare that to how you know, the challenges you run into in making sure, you know, section by section that any subsections are properly covered in that documentation. And it's very easy for an AI to, well, not very easy, but it is easier for an AI to identify what is missing from what it expects to be there. And I think that's one of the questions. Another question just rolled in here too, where, you know, how would Elsa get involved in decentralized clinical trials? And I think, you know, the reason I was saying that was what is of interest to me is think of how a lot of these decentralized clinical trials are being run. Think of all the different sites that are involved and partners that a sponsor will work with in this type of trial. And the documentation, the high level of variability you see in documentation across you know, sites. And a tool like Elsa is going to be very effective at being able to compare and contrast what it expects to be there for you know, site performance and documentation and what may not be there. So I think that is initially going to be what this, you know, a tool like this strong suit is pointing out where those where things are missing, right, and where it may not be up to snuff with the guidance.
Yeah, and I think even from, I'm sure if there isn't a question already, there will be a question. This sounds like it's expensive, right? So when you're working in industry and you have to go to management, senior leadership and say, hey, you know, give me a couple $1 million, I want to play with AI on my QMS, they're going to kick you out of the conference room and say you're crazy. I think there is a business advantage to using AI also. Most companies have piles and piles of data, whether it be clinical data, commercial data, in-process data, critical process parameter data, different assets. If you start using these tools to analyze some of what you've done across the last 10, 20, 30 years, you may see trends even in your behavior, how you select an asset, how you made a decision in a clinical trial that you had never thought of before because people with bias weren't looking at that, or they just didn't think that was something that needed to be considered. That's a tangible business value to your organization that results directly in return on investment. So I think it's not just about meeting a regulatory requirement. It's about getting drugs to patients faster. It's about making your business more efficient. It's about really understanding your data and then pushing that forward. So yes, while we're talking about Elsa and meeting inspections, don't just limit it to that. Limit it to your whole business and say, how can this be valuable to me?
No, that's great, right? Because, you know, if if you're developing practical, explainable approaches, rather than necessarily waiting for the guidance to become prescriptive, you can identify opportunities for improvement and be more effective in your roles now by trying to stay ahead of this. But it kind of comes back to what we're talking about here, right? Is we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So instead of meeting that with fear, meeting that with curiosity really creates a opportunity for yourself and the patients we're all looking to support. What also something you had touched on, Dennis, is really the last 6 months have been a crash course in AI for me, right? So obviously I was aware of ChatGPT, I'd used it, I was very impressed. Even my brother was using it for programming. It was absolutely fascinating. But it is now as we talk about Elsa, there are different behaviors and things that we have to keep an eye out for. So some of those the proactive things that we can be doing is developing different types of monitoring. Really be able to be able to demonstrate and detect issues with maybe AI systems you're already utilizing at your company, or to again, going back to the point of Elsa, even though it does 100% document review, is only about 85% accurate. So there's going to be drifts in behavior and how it functions and things that it pulls out, and you want to be ready to respond to that. And again, I'm just scratching the surface. I've been talking with Dr. Michael Advarra on the Advarra team here, who's our AI expert, has been enormously helpful. But really what he had said to me, and I like to say now I've stolen, I say all the time, somebody comes to you and says they're an AI expert, be really suspicious, because nobody's an expert. This is moving so fast that and everybody is just trying to keep up. So again, like developing these tools so that we are ready for handling an AI like that. I'm sure that's something that you've looked at, Dennis.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you just look at what we would call the leaders in the industry, right? You'll see Gemini comes out with a new version this week for Google, and they say, that one is the best large language model, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll see, right, Microsoft Copilot comes out with something, and the next week, and they say, oh, that's the best version. So it's scaling extremely quickly. Even the people who are developing the solutions are constantly coming out with a new version that they say is better. I think what you brought up about monitoring AI is really, really important to the industry. I think we get caught up in this concept of validation and how are we going to validate it. Validation is going to be important, to put as much as anything as guardrails on it, to say it won't leave the guardrails, which from a validation standpoint, I would say would be similar to how we did boundary testing on PLCs and things like that. But in addition to that, if you think about when you run an environmental monitoring program at your facility, yes, you initially qualify that facility, but then you put monitoring around your program and your cleaning procedures and things like that. You're going to have to do the same with your AI solutions and say, what are we looking at? How do we monitor it? How do we make sure it stays in the guardrails? And I think there's a lot of conversation on what that looks like. Is there an Elsa? And then it's a child to that, which actually monitors Elsa. And then is there another, right? So you start getting into some sort of scenario where you have an AI, but then you have an AI who's checking on the AI, and then you have a human check, right? So I think there's going to have to be all types of monitoring set up around that. I think that initial question we got on hallucinations and how do we know it's right and how do we know it's not tricking us is what you see on like 60 Minutes in Dateline, right? Like, hey, AI's taken over. It's brainwashed us now into kind of following whatever it's doing, and we may be wrong. And I think that's the initial fear. But again, I think that goes into the guardrails you put around it, right? How do you close your system off so it's not getting crazy answers or crazy things? And then how do you monitor to make sure that those guardrails are still being maintained is going to be, to me, what with agencies and especially the FDA wants. They want to see control. And then no, it's not going for a better word, hallucinating or going crazy. Again, if you send it to the web, and now it picks something off X or Twitter that's crazy, and it starts giving you that answer. Those are the things you have to be careful of, is how you're really controlling it, how you're monitoring it.
Yeah, and we're seeing that already too. It was very interesting. I had a conversation just a couple of days ago with people I never thought I'd be talking about, right? Just part of this, this crash course of, understanding what's happening in the industry now. I was talking to a gentleman who worked for the NSA, that does what they call penetration testing to ensure that these systems are as robust and effective as the claims that the companies make that they are. But also now there's this additional flavor of AI that's layered on top of it, where exactly to your point, that you need this constant monitoring of the AI itself, the tools that it's using, and the way it's being outsourced, right? And I don't, as we adopt tools and as we are exposed, and I've seen there's a couple of questions that are coming in about, how does it connect? Does Elsa connect to your QMS? How does it connect to your QMS? What does it do when it does that? And those are exactly the questions that we're asking right now. I wish I had firm answers for everybody, but hopefully in January we're going to learn more. But that's exactly what we're digging into. What is it doing with the data? And because how much effort have we all put in over the last X number of years to make sure our systems are secure, our data is secure, that it's not being exposed to anything. Even trials are becoming unblinded, things like that. And then the idea of having something like this just crawling through your EQMS is alarming, not just to the quality folks, but to the cybersecurity folks and the IT folks and everybody who's involved with it out there. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think those integration questions are really good. You see some of that today with adverse event reporting, where that air system is kind of connected in. It's not real time, but it's close. And I think that type of integration, and again, I think that's where, what are we trying to do in this meeting is tell people what's coming and prepare, right? Because I think, say 12 to 18 months, they want your critical deviation streamed through some sort of integration bridge that goes to Elsa, right? If you haven't prepared at all for that, right, with your data, with your systems, with your automation, then you're going to be at a disadvantage, right? If you're still on Excel spreadsheets, you're going to be at a disadvantage when they're saying, no, we want it streamed in. I think today we can say that that's not going to happen. And I think if you look at where everything is going in the world today, I think it's more likely than not likely. So I think that's the point. Don't get into a spot where you're behind 18 months. I don't think you're behind right now if you're in this meeting. I think you're kind of with us in that journey and that learning. Stay with us in that journey and learning rather than kind of go off and say, oh, this is never going to happen. And again, I think it's as much defensive as offensive at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly it, right? It is happening. It's happening right now. And I have a feeling that there are quite a few folks that registered even the letter that came out on December 1st, and they said, oh, I'm going to deal with that when I come back to the office in January.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think one of the things I'm discussing internally with my teams is how do we use it responsibly? Right? How do we not get over our skis, but how do we not fall behind? And I think that's that part where I said, blind enthusiasm can be dangerous. Hey, well, just do AI for everything and you're getting crazy answers and you lose control of your operation, versus that cautiously optimistic, smart implementation. Where can I really leverage this in my business to not only be successful compliance-wise, but drive efficiencies?
Yeah. Yep. And while protecting the integrity of your data, right? Guidance from, R3, which just came out, big piece of that, data integrity, right? And that's not going to change in the other guidances that continue to become updated, making sure that data is valid and protected and ultimately can be used at the end of especially clinical trial is absolutely critical.
Yes, right. You can't have PII data just roaming around the internet and available to everyone. So I tell my
But
kids.
that's the fear, right? Going back to like that 60 minutes fear mongering, right? That's exactly what's going to happen, right?
So, I mean, this is not my field of expertise, obviously, but the whole idea of cybersecurity and data security, I tell my kids, if there's a field to get into that, right? You're not going to need coders anymore. AI will be able to code for you, but what you're going to need is, wait, how do we secure this so it can't be available to everyone? And yes, I think data security teams and cyber teams, the emphasis on them and the pressure on them is going to be enormous, because when you start talking about streaming data, integrating data, moving it from one place to another in that data stream, it has to be secure along that line, and that's going to present its own challenges.
No, I agree with that. I may disagree with the piece on, everybody was saying, oh, we're not going to need coders anymore, anything like that. I won't bring up the number of Windows crashes and issues there have been since they've switched over to an AI coding model. But what I will bring up is there was an article, I wish I could remember it, but it's one of the biggest adopters of AI coding into their company is actually pushing back, because they're saying, it's really hard for us to go in and clean the code going through this traditional method, which the large language models use to develop code. And so I think that it is, we're going to see a lot of evolution, not just in our industry, but in other places where it seems to have settled in, that it's still early days yet, and where the value is going to be recognized.
Maybe that's the sequel to this. We come back in first quarter and we debate, should you have your child major in computer science and learn code, or is that going to be obsoleted in the next 3 to 5 years?
I like it. We could be really inflammatory with it too.
We could call each other names. Yeah, because that is, I think there's a big debate around that, right? From even at the academia level. Wait, do we train kids to code anymore? Is that job going away? So again, it's a really, really interesting topic. And then even the concept of no code software, and does AI take that place where it's just kind of taking data and then doing things in the background? So I think data is definitely king moving forward. This is going to be a lot more about data than even probably process and systems. It's going to be about, what is your data, right? What does that data mean to a company? I'll give one quick thought. Having worked at a number of places, I think a lot of times we think, let's put more data into a workflow, or let's put more data into a record. The more data you have now, it's going to be the more things that are looked at. So I think simplification is something that really needs to be looked at. Don't over document, because if you have AI tools looking at over documentation, they may start coming up with things that, one, aren't true, and two, that you didn't even want them to see in the first place. And then
and we see that now, right, Dennis? We see that now, because I have auditors come back and say, one of the minor findings or recommendations is this process is overcomplicated. Like, we want to see an effort being made to simplify things so it can be followed. And large language models are great at tearing that apart.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is just the concept of data dictionaries, especially when you're in I think smaller companies have to deal with this less than larger companies. Larger companies are very siloed. So supply chain may have a system and they look at it in a silo, and quality or regulatory may have a system and it's in a silo, and they're looking at the same data attribute, but it means different things to all three systems. That's really, really dangerous too when you have an AI model, because an AI model wants to break down the silos and look at everything. So if you don't have data dictionaries where you say, hey, this SKU number is used this way, and this way, and you clearly define it, if you don't do that, you're going to be at a disadvantage, because the AI is not going to say, oh yeah, supply chain uses it that way and reg uses it that way.
Right.
And again, so this idea of data is king, and that mindset around data and how we control our data, how we manage our data, where we put our data, how we stream our data, is going to be really, really important. Similar, right, and that innovation and transformation around that, similar to the cordless phone, cell phone, phone in the wall.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great questions coming in too, Dennis. And I just want to thank everybody for their engagement too, because this really helps drive the conversation. We want to be talking about what you're interested in, making sure we're trying to touch on the points that our limited expertise can help answer. One of the things that one of the questions that just came in is do you see an increased role for internal data governance and or internal systems needed by drug sponsors to ensure high performance inspection living? And I like that. That's already changing the language out there. Fantastic question. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. And in the reality is that absolutely you're going to need more expertise in this area, expertise also in AI, so that you really truly understand how these tools are being used, how the data is being used. There's lots of, it's very easy for a company or even a health authority like the FDA to make a claim of how it's functioning. But you want to have that internal expertise to understand what's happening and push back where it's appropriate. And that's the big thing. And what that hasn't changed with the FDA is that, ask questions. You can engage them and better understand what's going to happen. If an inspection is happening, in 3 months from now, 3 weeks from now, ask them, hey, are you intending to use Elsa during this inspection? And that'll help you. Even just asking those questions initially will help address some of those.
I think the expertise is a really good point. I think AI is not. It's not going somewhere, buying a TV, hanging it on the wall, turning it on, and now the TV works. I think there is an aspect of forward engineering and making sure that tool is working inside of your process effectively. And I think that's where experience internal and understanding those things and understanding your business, rather than just kind of going out and buying software and saying, oh, I bought software, put it on my computer, and now it works. There has to be a little bit of engineering and forward engineering internally to make sure the guardrails are set up, to make sure that's delivering the way you want it to, and expertise and education is going to help that.
And back to your point too of making sure that you're building things like data dictionaries, future-proofing your processes by simplifying them now, right? So that you're not getting caught up in a web of potential AI findings that are grounded in just confusion of the tools of a tool like Elsa's understanding of how your organization works. Right, you can be proactive in those in that manner. But the other piece of it too is really doing some of the education of your own people, right? You think again, we talk about the human in the loop, preparing for making sure that AI is giving us use as a tool, is giving us useful outputs, but also the human in the loop being I'll be the first one to admit, I probably deferred 3 updates to my computer right before we started this presentation to make sure that nothing got broken in the way. And that's exactly it, right? Humans are going to interface with these types of tools in different ways. And the more proactive we can be in simplifying that, the better instructions we can provide our own people on how to deal with it, the better. Because I can guarantee a lot of you are probably dealing with AI policies at your companies that are all of 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months old, that are just being adopted now and really haven't been put through the test of something like a tool like Elsa.
Yeah, and people are still going to make the decisions and interpret the data and interpret the results. I think look at AI as a tool to help you with that. And I think that's where the education around it, what can it do? What can it deliver for me? How does it make me better? Again, that bigger, stronger, faster, right? Athletes are still on the field today. Just linebackers are 250 pounds running 4.4s, not 220 pounds running 4.6s like they were in the 90s. And I think that's the biggest difference. People are gonna have to get bigger, stronger, faster.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. There's another really good question that came in. I'm just gonna address them because we'll get to the end. We're not gonna be able to answer all your questions. Please send them in. We'll try to reach out to you afterwards and certainly answer whatever we can. I just want to make sure we touch on some of these. A very simple one that came in: wouldn't the FDA need to disclose if they're going to use Elsa in an upcoming inspection? You'd think so, but it's a brave new world that we're all living in, and my understanding from whispers that I've heard that people have experienced this, that they haven't, and they find out after the fact.
Yeah, I look, that's a great question, and my answer to that is they're the FDA. I mean, there was the police in my neighborhood started hiding behind a different tree that I didn't know about, and I got pulled over, and I was like, wait, don't you have to kind of be behind that tree, right? And I think they can kind of do whatever they want, and I think that's kind of that. Make sure you're ready to play defense a little bit, not just offense, because they don't have right now. Maybe they make that guideline and they say we will announce to you, but right now they're not.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully we're all going to get more clarity in the coming weeks in January. But as Dennis said, I think we're all doing the right thing right now, is engaging early, understanding that more information is coming out, sometimes in drips and drabs, and it may come out in a torrent in January. But the important thing is to just be current on what's happening, current what the FDA's position is, and ask questions about, what if you're a sponsor, what fellow sponsors are doing. If you're a site, how other sites are making sure that they're prepared for this. Especially if you're the type of site that runs multiple studies concurrently, right? You know how often you get inspected. I know how often I got inspected as a CRO. It is an opportunity to learn kind of as we go. And I kind of wanted to bring it back to what we were talking earlier in this. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left here. I can't believe how quick the time flies by. You really touched on it, Dennis, but again, I think it really bears repeating. The difference between improving existing processes and then truly innovating, right? There's a big difference here. I know you have some strong feelings about this.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what I had talked about the phone, right? But I think one of the things is think out of the box, be collaborative in your organizations, don't silence voices, bring different voices in the room that maybe you haven't brought in before, and really look at what you're doing and challenge each other, right? I think that idea of debate, sometimes it's, oh, don't attack the process, don't be negative. I think it's a good opportunity to really look at what you're doing and say, can we do it better and build AI into a new process, not just put it over an existing one. And that's something that I think is really important. If you use AI and say, I'm gonna almost make it an off-ramp, or I'm gonna make it ancillary to an existing process, you're not gonna get the juice from that squeeze. If you say, I'm gonna document a new process and implement AI somewhere in that process, now you're, I think, really using it the way it was intended to be used, to drive an efficiency. And I think that's where your companies are going to see enormous return on investment, and then they're going to give you that money to continue to innovate.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, right? It is the difference between putting a Band-Aid on an existing process just so you can limp along and say, yeah, we're ready for this, versus really evaluating it from the ground up of saying, this is the world we live in now, and this is how we are going to manage these challenges. So I have to put in a plug for Advarra. Please, if I'm super chatty. You have questions, send the questions in. You just want to talk about any of this, or anything around inspection readiness or audits and compliance. If you get a hold of my phone number or my email, you'll get tons of free consulting, because I just like to talk, and I love the industry. I've spent my life in this industry, and I love to hear what people are working on and how we're handling new challenges and old familiar ones. What I will say, we have time for one last question. I actually really like it, so I want to make sure we get this last one in here. Somebody says, I think it'll be interesting to see the impact of AI in the areas of mergers and acquisitions, and how it is used in evaluating compliance in prospective purchases in the life sciences. Have you heard of any instances where AI has been used to evaluate overall compliance of prospective acquisitions? And I love this question, I bet you love it for the same reason, Dennis, because the last person who is talking in any organization when you're talking about an acquisition of a new product are the folks in quality, and then we're just kind of left there to pick up the pieces. And I say that with only love in my heart, but I think the short answer is I don't know of any specific examples, but obviously this is an opportunity to get ahead of those challenges that you face post-acquisition as a quality department by even having a tool like this that you can run on a potential acquisition.
Yeah, awesome question, awesome use case. What I would say is making the QMS part of the risk profile during the acquisition and using AI to do it would be smart. So totally agree. Don't know of it yet, but I think it's a great use case. I know we're at time. Just want to thank Advarra for the opportunity to speak here. I echo Abe's sentiments. I think Advarra is a great company, and if you're looking for support, I would use them. Thank you to the audience.
We didn't pay him to say that either. He said that all on his own.
I'm not even getting paid to do this, in case you're wondering. But,
no, it's just a favor. So thank you, Dennis.
So, but no, just happy holidays to everyone. Thanks to the audience for attending, and stay safe and healthy during the holiday season.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis, and thank you to all our attendees. I really appreciate that and your engagement. There's a lot of great questions out there. We'll try to get to them. So thank you all.
I just wanted to say myself, thank you very much for the very insightful presentation today. We have reached the end of our time. We have addressed quite a few audience questions throughout, but don't worry, if we didn't get to your questions, the team at Advarra will follow up with you, or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the contact info that I've put up on the screen. I want to thank all of our audience for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated, as it helps us to improve our webinars. Now, additionally, I've shared a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so they may register for the recording here as well. For those watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and gain access to features such as viewing the recording and more. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.